Hey, good morning. My name is Maya Tarashvili. I'm the director of our Eurasia program here at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for such an important discussion. Today, as you know, marks 3 years since Russia's unprovoked full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In the 3 years that this war has been going on, over 33,000 civilian casualties have suffered, and Russia is currently occupying more than 7% of Ukraine's territory. With a new administration here in the United States and now a new government incoming in Germany, things are changing quickly in Ukraine, but also in global politics. So we felt that this was an important moment to gather a group of our experts and talk about the 3 years so far, but also what this year might hold for the war and for Ukraine's future. I am joined by my very dear colleagues and experts on the subject matter. We have Stefan Meister, who is the head of the Center for Order and Governance in Eastern Europe, Russia, and Central Asia at the German Council on Foreign Relations. We also have Pavel Luzhin, who's a frequent FPRI contributor. He holds a doctorate in international relations from the Institute of World Economy and International Relations and writes about Russia's politics, defense affairs, and global security. He is currently based here in the United States. And we have Dr. Robert Hamilton, who is the head of Eurasia Research here at FPRI. We were also supposed to be joined by our Ukrainian colleague and a senior fellow at FPRI, Maria Avdeeva, but again, understanding what an important date this is, and she is based in Ukraine. She was detained at the last minute, so will not be able to join us, unfortunately. I want to start with Dr. Stefan Meister. I've asked some questions, initial questions to our speakers so they can make some initial remarks just for a few minutes, and then we will go into the discussion. Please use the Q&A feature to send in your questions, and I will get to as many of them as possible. Stefan, thank you so much for joining us, and let's start with you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. You asked me about what have the EU and Germany done right to support Ukraine and where they have fallen short, or what do they need to do better to support Ukraine. So I will just focus relatively quickly on this question. I'm also happy to discuss with you the German election if there are questions on this, because I think that's for Europe now with this situation in the US and this pressure also from the US on Ukraine. I think it's very important also how the EU and Europe is able to act. So let's maybe just start what I think they have done right, to some extent. So I think February 2022, I think what we saw for the first time, especially with Germany, that the German elites recognized that Russia is the biggest threat to German and European security. So that was not the case in 2014 with the Crimean annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass, and also the declaration by some Russian officials that they are on a war with the West and also with Europe. But that was only this moment 3 years ago when there was this recognition. We had a Zeitenwende speech of Chancellor Olaf Scholz, the famous one where he recognized this and announced a 100 billion fund for defense in Germany. German army is one of the most underfunded armies in Europe, we can say, even if it's Germany the biggest economy in Europe. And only because of this special fund, Germany reaches the 2% of the GDP in defense spending. And I think what was really a big success, the completely decoupling from Russian gas. So when Angela Merkel left the office in 2021, we had a dependency on Russian gas of 65%. So I think that's one of the results of her chancellorship. And we decoupled completely from Russian gas, as much as you can decouple from Russian gas if you buy on the global market also LNG. Germany and Europe supported the large-scale sanctions against Russia I think, which have an impact on the Russian economy and especially also on the technology sector. We saw an increasing support for Ukraine from the German side. Germany has become, after the US, the #2 supporter in terms of funding, also military support for Ukraine, with 28 billion euro until the end of 2024. Only military and financial support. I don't talk here about Ukrainian refugees, because Germany is also the country who took most of the Ukrainian refugees from all the countries worldwide, with more than 1 million Ukrainian refugees. Europe is now the biggest financial supporter of Ukraine, and it is growing. So I think Donald Trump is here wrong that the US is the biggest funder of Ukraine. EU has set up an Ukraine support group, which works on funding and supporting Ukraine in different fields. So it's really a key institution to coordinate donors, and it will be really crucial, and it is already crucial for the reconstruction of Ukraine. The EU opened the enlargement package for Ukraine. I think that was a no-go before this war, but the EU is enlarging again, and a huge support for EU integration in terms of technical and financial support for Ukraine. So Ukraine has become a key destination of EU support in different sectors. And huge support for Ukrainian refugees by the EU and the member states. I think we have to mention here. So what went wrong, and where we could improve? I think there was a lack of European leadership on Ukraine. No German leadership. I didn't see any other leadership, even if Macron tried hard. There was US leadership in the end, and support, especially in the initial phase. And I think there would be no Ukraine like we have it today without this US leadership and support. I think we have to say this. And then additionally, we have the European support. I think there were no lessons learned from Trump 1.0 and the 2014 war by European leaders, or very limited lessons learned, lack of investment in our own defense, a lot of wait and see or react to the situation on the war. Putin kept in the end also the escalation dominance, and there was no plan, no strategy, no short, no middle, no long term for Ukraine. So very reactive policy also, and especially Germany, very reactive, supplying after long discussions a little bit more. If we would have acted more quickly and decisive in the military support for Ukraine in 2022, we would have really a different situation now, I think. And we also messed it up to some extent in which situation Ukraine is now. There was no preparation, or very limited preparation, of our societies for a long war, and the high costs we have to take to support Ukraine in long term in our own interest. So I think there's a lack of communication, and not only a lack of strategy. And this opened the space for populists to undermine the support of Ukraine. Ukraine needs security guarantees. We need to develop a plan how to get them on the track, and we need to empower ourselves to give Ukraine the security guarantees if there's no NATO membership possible. And I think we are not capable. We are not capable to do this. More investment in and integration with Ukraine defense industry, I think, is needed. Ukraine needs to be empowered to survive a long war, and on one point to win it, whatever it means. And that needs more engagement, investment from Europe in Ukraine defense sectors and also in other fields. I think we need a systematic approach to weaken Russia's capability to wage this war. I think these sanctions are not sufficient. And I think we also need to think about how to engage in other fields where Russia is engaging, in the post-Soviet region, in Africa, to weaken Russia. Globally, regionally, and globally. So we need to stress also Russia to have less resources it puts on Ukraine. And there's no Russia policy. There's no Russia strategy also, which is part of also dealing with Ukraine in this war. There's a lack of understanding that this is a long war. It will not go away, even if Donald Trump speaks about a ceasefire, and it's about European security order and Russia's role in the global order, and Ukraine is here key. So I think maybe Donald Trump helps us now to arrive finally in the reality, but I think we still talk a lot of, but doing not the right thing or doing not sufficient thing. Let's say it like this, to react to the situation which we are. I just stop here.
Wow, thank you so much, Stefan. I think you summed it up really beautifully and laid out groundwork for a very useful discussion. And as I turn it over to you, Bob, and I want to ask you what the United States has done right, where have we fallen short? Similar questions to what I asked Stefan. Think about our administration, specifically our president, who has resorted to victim blaming. So that's a sort of a new challenge in this array of many challenges that Stefan just laid out. So yes, it's important to talk about what we've done right and wrong, but I would love your take on what can be expected from this president who does not believe in Ukraine and has made it very clear he does not support Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, Maya, and thanks for the invitation. Look, I guess I would start by saying let's back away from the day-to-day of U.S. policy, and we should look at it, more holistically. Successful policy in any administration requires a combination of experience and vision. You need people who know how a government runs, and then you need people who have and can articulate a strategic end or a vision for the policy that they're implementing. The Biden administration had plenty of experience, but I would argue very little vision. It never articulated a consistent vision for the end of the war. We sometimes would say, we're going to give Ukraine everything it needs to win. Other times we would say, we're going to put Ukraine in the best position for negotiations. And the Biden administration was never willing to accept the risk required to bring either vision to reality. So the Trump administration has a split in vision. I would say the Trump administration, first of all, has very little experience. They have very few people in the administration who understand policy, strategy, war, Russia, or Ukraine. That's a problem. The people who are in those positions, there are people like Keith Kellogg and others who do understand these things and do have the requisite experience, but they do not appear to be in the driver's seat and they do not appear to be in charge. They're certainly not driving the narrative. So what I think we're seeing in the early days of the Trump administration is a split in the vision for the end state between Trump, who wants to end the war and even seems to incline to the Russian view of the reasons it started and how it should end, and others like Kellogg, whom I mentioned, who understand that getting Russia to bargain in good faith requires increasing pressure on Russia before it comes to the bargaining table, and getting Russia to respect any ceasefire requires security guarantees for Ukraine backed by a credible deterrent force in Ukraine. And it's not clear which vision will win out. The president's vision is clearly the one that's getting the most press and the most play. But it's not clear to me yet whether he's engaging in some sort of bargaining, and that's why he's calling Zelensky a dictator and criticizing him and saying he shouldn't have started the war, and that's some sort of bargaining strategy on our part, or if he really believes those things. And then to back off a little bit and back to the Biden administration, if you were to do a postmortem or an assessment of the total of the Biden administration's strategy, I think the problem was that we were overly focused on the risk of escalation, and we focused too little on the risk of a Russian victory. One of the best analysts of the Russian military, Dara Massakat, has said this multiple times. If Russia wins, it will be bruised, vengeful, and it will believe it has bested the West or defeated the West. And every time Putin has believed he has defeated the West, in Georgia in 2008, in Ukraine in 2014, in Syria in 2015, he turned out to be radically wrong about the last one. But every time he's believed he's gotten the best of the West, he's launched a larger, more ambitious war in the wake of that. And so Russia needs to be stopped. The only way Russia will stop is if it is stopped, if it's forced to stop. On the Biden administration, early on in the war, it made sense to withhold the more complicated and capable military systems because there was still a belief that the war would probably be fairly short. And if it was a short war, one, we wouldn't have time to adequately train Ukraine to use these systems and deploy these systems and get them to the front line. And two, if Ukraine lost quickly, Russia would capture these systems and sensitive technology would fall into Russian hands. But by late April 2022, at the latest, it became clear that this was going to be a long war, a longer war at least. From that time, my perspective is it made sense to give Ukraine everything it needed in sufficient quantities to make a difference and lift the restrictions on the use of US equipment. And this is looking back, this is retrospective, but I think that would have been especially important during Ukraine's Kharkiv and Kherson counteroffensives in the late summer and fall of 2022, when the Russian military was very close to a collapse in Ukraine. We can get into the debate over whether Russia would have used nuclear weapons at that time had its military collapsed in Ukraine. I frankly don't think it would have. But again, that was a period in which, had Ukraine had enough weapons of the right types and was able to use them to the full extent of their capability, we could have seen, it could have been a sea change in the war, and it could have led to a very different trajectory than where we are now. Real quickly on the Trump administration, early assessment on the Trump administration. Look, this is a president who prides himself on his bargaining strategy. Our bargaining strategy with Russia has been, I can't remember nor can I conceive of a worse bargaining strategy. We gave away two major things to Russia before we ever sat down at the table with them. Leave aside the fact that we're sitting at the table with Russia without the Ukrainians or our European allies present. That's a huge problem. But Trump gave away, and other people in the Trump administration announced publicly, that it was unrealistic to expect Ukraine to recover its territorial integrity, and that NATO membership, that Ukraine should give up on the idea of NATO membership. We gave these things away before we ever sat down at the table with Russia. Again, whether Ukraine has the military capability to regain its territorial integrity and whether NATO will accept Ukraine are beside the point. You don't give away those things before you sit down. What that does is it shrinks the bargaining space from US position, Russia position. The US position just moved halfway to the Russian position, which ensures that whatever bargaining space remains is on Russia's side. And so whatever agreement that we might ink with the Russians on Ukraine will be strongly in Russia's favor. Even so, I think an agreement is unlikely, and that's because Russian demands are so extreme that even these unilateral US concessions don't guarantee a deal. Russia still insists that Ukraine give up all of the 5 provinces Russia has annexed, to include the 30% of Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson provinces that Russia currently doesn't control. In other words, it is not in military control of 30% of those provinces, but it demands that Ukraine give those up as part of a ceasefire. It still demands Ukraine's demilitarization. It's rejected peacekeeping or deterrent forces from NATO members, which just ensures that Russia can restart the war whenever it's ready. And any ceasefire that we sign with Russia will be temporary and will last only as long as Russia decides it's in its interest, and when it's ready, it will restart the war. So increasingly, the negotiations are breaking down to the US and Russia on one side and Europe and Ukraine on the other, which is hugely, hugely problematic. And again, finally, I would say that Russia is telegraphing its intent to break any ceasefire. They are telling us what they're going to do they're continuing to say the Ukrainian government is illegitimate so that Russia will not be bound by any agreement. In other words, Putin, as well as Trump and others continue to say that Zelensky is a dictator, that Zelensky has not had elections, he's therefore illegitimate. And the Russians have said, this means we are not going to be bound by anything we sign with this government because it's an illegitimate government. So I guess I'll leave it there for now. Happy to get into some more of this in the Q&A, but I think there have been, both of our approaches have been problematic. The current approach is significantly more problematic.
Thank you very much, Bob. Let's turn it over to you, Pavel. From where we stand now, do you believe that Russia has accomplished its goals? And then another very important question that we don't spend enough time discussing: how has the war impacted the domestic picture in Russia? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maya. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. So, towards Russian goals, firstly, we have to remind the Russian goals. Russia's goals, officially declared, very well documented. They were the following. First of all, eliminate Ukrainians' statehood. It was declared. several times. It was declared even in the Vladimir Putin's article of June 2021. The second goal, eliminating of Ukraine's culture. Because Putin personally, some guys from his inner circle, they mentioned many times, there is no Ukrainian culture. Ukrainian culture is just a part of the Russian culture. What does it mean in technical terms? In technical terms, it means genocide. Third goal, eliminate Western unity, eliminate NATO and US leadership in the West. Remember Russian ultimatum of December 2021. What has Russia achieved? Nothing. Yes, Russia was able to capture a significant portion of Ukrainian territory. Before February 24, 2022, Russia controlled about 11% of Ukrainian territory. Now Russia controls about 19% of Ukrainian territory. So 3 years of war plus 8% of Ukrainian territory. Not too small, but not what many experts expected in the morning of February 24, 2022. Moreover, if we look not on the territorial capturing or something like that, but if we look at the Russian military doctrine, if we look at what Russian military publish inside their journals, what the discussion is there. I mean, we don't see the whole discussion, but we see some significant evidences about this discussion. The Russian doctrine says that capturing territory cannot be a purpose at all. It can be a side effect of warfare, side effect of combat operation. But the main goal of any combat operation on the theater must be the defeat of adversaries' forces. If it is a theater level operation, so the adversaries' forces must be defeated in the whole way. If it is a tactical operation, the adversaries' group of forces must be defeated. When did Russia defeat the Ukrainian group of forces last time? It was May 2022 Mariupol. After that, Russia was trying several times to defeat significant group of Ukrainian forces: Bakhmut, Vuhledar, Avdiivka, Pokrovsk, and so on and so on. And Russia was not able to do this. Russia lost up to 300,000 soldiers and officers killed, and another several 100,000 soldiers and officers wounded. And the last time Russia was able to defeat a Ukrainian group of forces was May 2022, almost 3 years ago. So Russian forces are still able to push Ukrainian forces back, but they're not able to defeat them. I think that is a significant fact we should think about after this 3 years of the war. And of course, after this 3 years of the war, the Russian military potential is limited. And we see that Russia still relies on some stockpiles of Soviet era arms and equipment. And these stockpiles are ending. The most of them will be exhausted by the second half of this year. In case of the rate of losses will be the same like it was in 2024. if there will not be a kind of ceasefire or something like that. Even the production rate of Russian cruise missiles, long-range cruise missiles, based on stockpiles of engines made in the Soviet Ukraine in 1980s. We can see this, fingerprints of this stockpile in the Russian statistics. We can see this. For instance, towards gunpowders, the same. Russia is dependent on supplies of artillery shells from North Korea. Not because Russia is really happy about this, but because Russia cannot increase the production rates of artillery shells significantly. Look at statistics. Toluenes, nitric acid, aluminum powders, oleum, cellulose. We do not see any significant increase of production rates. All these things you need for production of gunpowders, explosives, and so on and so on. If you do not increase the production of these things, you cannot increase the production of artillery shells, air bombs, and so on and so on. You may see Russians on motorcycles, Russians on China-made buggies. Russia uses donkeys for logistics. Russian soldiers purchase donkeys by their own salaries and engage them in the logistics on the front line. So Russia may be defeated. Russia can be defeated. And in my opinion, Russia must be defeated. And there are a lot of sources on the West and even in the European Union alone. There are a lot of resources to do this, to help Ukraine to do this. Towards the Russian domestic cohesion, the situation is much more complicated. Because on the one hand, we do see a significant level of escapism, people's escapism, people's so-called interim immigration. People prefer not to mention the war. They didn't care much when Prigozhin and his mercenaries captured the headquarters of the South Military District and were trying to get to Moscow in June 2023. Russians do not care about the presence of Ukrainian army in the Kursk region since August 2024. Russians just do not care. And when some, people in Europe or in the United States or people in Russia, they tell, oh no, Russia cannot give up Ukrainian occupied territories because Russians will not understand this step. Russians will not care about this step. They do not care about Kursk. How can we expect that they will care about Melitopol, Mariupol, even Crimea? They will not care about this. But on the other hand, we should understand that this war, it is not Putin's personal war. This war is ideologically motivated. And people who believe in this ideology, they are not, limited only by Putin and his close cronies. A significant number of Russians believe that there are no Ukrainians as a separate culture. There are no Ukrainian statehood. Millions of Russians still believe that the Soviet Union or some kind of Eurasian empire must be restored. So we have to take this into account. People still believe, not all of people of Russia, but many people of Russia still believe that Ukraine must be defeated, that the West must be defeated. Maybe, okay, they are ready to recognize that Russia cannot achieve these goals soon, that Russia needs a break. But nevertheless, this strategy still exists. If Russia will be given the break, Russia will try to restore. And don't forget about example from completely different region. When in October 2023, Hamas and Hezbollah attacked Israel, they didn't have, military-industrial complex and hundreds of thousands of regular forces. They just tried to do what they wanted to do, what they believe they need to do. So that's why if Russia will be given a break, Russia will not be able to restore its military power, which it has prior February 2022. But it doesn't mean Russia will not try to capture Ukraine, capture Moldova, capture Baltic states, defeat NATO on the NATO soil. So we have to take this into account. And we also have to take into account that there is a significant group of beneficiaries of the war in Russia. People who get salaries from arms manufacturing, people who get billions of rubles and even dollars in import substitution programs, and so on, so on, so on. Millions of people in Russia are interested in further self-isolation of Russia. Millions of people believe that the West is bad. There are bad guys, and Russia has to defeat them together with Iran, with support from Iran, North Korea, People's Republic of China, and so on and so on. So when, for instance, some people say that, oh, we have to focus on Pacific Ocean rather than on European theater. You cannot do this. Currently, North Korean army is fighting on the European theater. Ukraine currently is fighting against 2 nuclear powers. So that's it, I presume.
Thank you so much, Pavel. I think there were a lot of powerful messages here, but the number one of them all, I think that we all need to keep in mind and maybe keep repeating a little bit more for our American administration to hear is that Russia is not winning this war and has not accomplished any of its goals despite a 3-year war. So there's a lot here to hold on to, and we'll continue to explore this in the discussion. Stefan, I want to turn it over to you really quickly because of the recent German election. My simple question for you is, what do you expect from the very likely incoming Chancellor Merz? What does his track record look like on Ukraine? And his party's support for Ukraine, what can be expected? My main motivation here is to understand whether or not we will have a strong individual leader in Europe. We're desperate right now for strong individual leaders who will be community organizers, who will organize support for Ukraine, and who will say the right things that we so desperately want to hear right now. Thank you.
Sure. I think we will have to see how Merz will develop. At the moment, he sounds good. He had also this foreign policy speech a couple of weeks ago, I think, where he said the right things. He will supply Taurus. I think this is what Scholz never did, and I think he will do it not because of Ukraine, but because of Scholz. That he wants to show that he's different and that he's able to act. I think this is his main message. I'm someone who can fix things, who's able to act in certain kind of situations, who can lead on also in Europe. And he also wants to travel with his first travel to on one day to Paris and to Warsaw. So I think he also wants to send these kind of messages. nevertheless, I think I'm working with German elites since 15, 20 years. And my expectations in terms of leadership, in terms of strategic depth, in terms of willingness, spending money is very low, to be honest. I think we all thought that Vladimir Putin, with his war, at least in 2022, will force us to do the things which are necessary. Maybe Donald Trump is now doing it. But I think it's really also about German debt break. It's about going on common debts in the European Union, also funding defense, really investing in defense industry, also spending much more money in the support of Ukraine, and that is still very controversial also in the German society and in some of the EU member states. So I think for Merz and his party, who is a classical transatlantic party, yeah, Adenauer was the person who made the big shift towards the US. It's really an identity question now. It's like for the Social Democrats with Ostpolitik, yeah, with Russia, that was their identity question. This is now about the US, and they struggle also to understand this. This is really a different reality with Donald Trump. And he does see Germany and Europe maybe as an adversary and not as a partner. It's someone you have to you make transactional deals. You put them under pressure. So, and I'm not so sure how much we are ready for this because we are so dependent on the US in terms of security. We cannot provide the troops which are necessary to protect a ceasefire agreement, and we are very much dependent on the US market. Yeah, so I think this is our most important trading partner beside China. So I think there are vulnerabilities in Europe, and if Merz is able to create kind of cohesion, to lead Europe, to really open also the budget and really be willing as the third economy in the world to fund European defense, integrating Ukrainian defense industry also more with Europe. We will have to see. So I see the opportunities, but I also see the limits. Also, the limits in strategic culture in Germany. And again, this is playing in the hands of Mr. Putin. We can describe all the weaknesses of Russia, but I think we creating opportunities for Russian leadership. And Trump is a huge opportunity in a moment where Russia is really under pressure to give them just to end this war, because Trump wants to get rid of the war, yeah, and he wants to deal with other things. And I see here the danger, the weaknesses also of the Europeans really to step in and to do the things which are necessary.
Stefan, I just want to ask you a quick follow-up, an audience question, specifically a military-related one. Is there any likelihood that FRG will void its 300,000 person limitation, the cap on military manpower, that it adheres to under the reunification treaty, and can it meet the current requirements under this cap?
I don't think this is a question at the moment for Germany to reach 300,000. I think we are really far away. Yeah, so I rather have problems to reach the 200,000. I think that's not discussed at all. So there's no discussion about this issue. I think it depends on where we move also on defense, where we move also in rebuilding our armies. I don't know if it's really about such a big army in Europe, but that's not a discussion. So I think it's not on the table at the moment that this is something we have to decide about. That's why it's difficult for me to assess if this. I think I would say it would be possible if it's necessary on one point, and if we are maybe in at least Russia attacks NATO members, for instance, and then we really have to rebuild something. But I think we are really, really far away from this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, far away from building up such a troop, not from a possible Russian test. Yeah, if NATO is able to act.
Thank you, Stefan. Bob, I want to pose this next question to you. How long can Ukraine keep fighting without U.S. aid, including denial of Starlink and satellite intelligence, potential denial, right? There have been sort of, again, we've seen a lot of going back and forth from the administration that they might deny, they may not. But anyway, how long can, I think this is the most important question in the room right now. How long can Ukraine keep on fighting without the US support? And then I want to ask the same question to Pavel, but about Russia in general. What is your assessment of how much longer Russia could keep up this war? But Bob, maybe you could answer sort of both for Ukraine and Russia, and then we'll go
Sure,
to.
it's a fair question and an important question, as you note, Maya. So a cutoff in U.S. aid, I think, would be extremely damaging, but not fatal to Ukraine. Ukraine's going to continue to fight. Ukraine is going to continue to fight, and they may have to then shift to a more asymmetric fight, an unconventional fight, an insurgency. But they're going to continue to fight. And one of the biggest questions, if the U.S. does reduce or eliminate aid, is can Europe make up the difference and when? So Europe has a Starlink, it's called Iris-2, but it's a Starlink analog that it's deploying, but it won't be ready until 2030, right? So it won't be fully capable until 2030. So that obviously is a problem. The loss of Starlink would hurt Ukraine. The loss of U.S. support would hurt Ukraine. The question is whether Europe can make up the difference. But right now, Ukraine is actually in fairly good shape in terms of equipment. I talked to one of our scholars who just came out of Ukraine, and he says, and we hear this often, Ukraine's biggest problem right now is personnel. It's personnel strength. They're mobilizing about 30,000 people a month, but they're losing about half of them to desertion, to AWOL. So they've got to figure out a way to sustain their personnel mobilization rates and then to keep the people that they mobilize. They're able to make up on the front lines, they're able to make up a lot of the personnel gaps. In other words, the shortages of personnel with artillery and drones. And they're about equal in terms of artillery firing rates of artillery shells with the Russians on a day-to-day basis now, much different than it was during the suspension of U.S. aid when the Congress in late 2023 and early 2024 couldn't pass a supplemental bill. So we could be back in a space like that if the U.S. cuts off support altogether, if Europe is not able to make up the difference. So it's a serious problem. But I think we also need to look at the Russian side of this. I'm happen to be at a conference today where we had a whole panel on the Ukraine war, and some of the statistics are pretty revealing on the Russian side. I'll list some of them now because I think they're instructive. Russia's 41 to 48% of Russia's total casualties since the start of the war, they suffered in 2024 alone. So in 1 year of a 3-year war, they've suffered almost 50% of their casualties, total personnel casualties. Current Russia, we've talked about this, but Russia currently controls 19.2% of Ukraine. They controlled 19.6% following their retreat from the north in April, May of 2022. Then Ukraine gained some territory back, and then Russia's incrementally gained some of that back. But Russia has not gained much territory at all in the last. We keep hearing about these incessant Russian territorial gains, but they're really pretty marginal. And they're pretty tactical and incremental. As long as Ukraine can preserve the integrity of its defensive lines and not suffer a breakthrough that Russia can exploit, I think Ukraine may continue to lose ground, but it will not be fatal or even that detrimental to the Ukrainian overall war effort. Russia had 7,300 tanks at the start of the war. They have lost half of those. And only 500 of the about 3,700 tanks they've lost can be reconditioned. And there, Pavel, I want to hear your assessment of this, but my understanding is Russia is not able to produce tanks at the rate it's losing them, and will not be able to. And so that's a problem for Russia. In 2024 alone, Russia expended more than twice as many artillery shells as it expended in all of 2022 and 2023. And as Pavel says, they're largely reliant on North Korea now for artillery shells. So, and then finally, on the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian Defense Industrial Base at the beginning of the war was producing 10% of the weapons of the equipment that Ukraine used. Only 10% were produced in Ukraine. Now it's a third. So the Ukrainian Defense Industrial Base is now producing more than 3 times as many of the weapons that it uses as it was before the war. It's still operating at only 50% capacity, and that's because it lacks funding. So if the US were to cut off equipment, one of the ideas that you hear is that the 300 billion in frozen Russian assets, much of which is in Europe and much of which happens to be in Belgium, if that were to be given to Ukraine to fund the Ukrainian defense industry, the Ukrainian defense industry, if it had orders, if it had money, could essentially double its production very quickly. So there are solutions in place for Ukraine if the US cuts off support. It will be painful and it will be disruptive. But I think we're not looking hard enough at some of the problems that Russia faces that are structural, chronic, and have no easy solutions.
Thank you, Bob. Pavel, let's turn it over to you.
I do have a portion of optimism, even if Starlink will be switched off and OneWeb, European counterpart of Starlink, OneWeb is not ready. There is a backup option, and I know a couple of engineers, American engineers, who is developing this backup option. This backup option is balloons, stratospheric balloons. You may use them as a relay system for communication. Towards Russia, you know, the level of deterioration of the Russian armed forces is so dramatic that we can look at any segment of the Russian army and we will see this deterioration. Russia lost more than 5,000 officers dead. That means another 15 to 25,000 officers wounded. If you don't have officers, you can try to mobilize hundreds of thousands of soldiers, millions of soldiers. They will never become a regular army. And also, we do not see increase of military students in Russia. So we can relatively precisely say that in next 5 years, until 2030, the number of Russian officers will be decreasing because Russia is not able to restore the pre-war number of officers. And that's a problem for us. Towards main battle tanks, Bob just told us that, yeah, Russia is losing more tanks than it is capable to produce. I should remind that the main producer of the Russian tanks in the world is India, which produces T-90 tanks at the level of 100, 120 a year. Or at least it was produced before it began the program of its own national tank. And if we look at captured Russian tanks captured by Ukrainians, we can see T-90 as main battle tank with a gun produced in 1992. So what does it mean? That means Russia relies on stockpiles. Relies on stockpiles, on stockpiles of tanks, on stockpiles of barrels, but Russia cannot increase the domestic production significantly. We can look the same in the field of armored vehicles, artillery, and so on and so on. Even satellite navigation. Russia does have its own satellite navigation GLONASS, but the Russian military use commercial GPS trackers because GLONASS does not work perfectly and GLONASS is deteriorating. We just can open the website of GLONASS system. We can count how many satellites work out the guaranteed lifetime. Some of them work several times more years than it was guaranteed. We can see the dynamic of technical maintenance procedures with any single satellite. And we can conclude that Russia is losing GLONASS. Russia is losing GLONASS right now. And Russia will not be able to restore the system. But Russian military has access to China-made GPS trackers, which you can use in your car, but Russians use these trackers in their tanks and even in their aircrafts, because they do not have access to Garmin systems, but they can use this commercial car GPS tracker to use them in their bombers, helicopters, and so on. Russia is deteriorating. That doesn't mean that Russia is not a threat, that Russia cannot attack Baltic state, one of them or all three or four of them. Russia might try because of ideological motivation. But in terms of conventional military power, Russia is weakening. And the only way to eliminate this threat is to make this weakening irreversible. I saw the question in the chat that whether or not Russia may rely on stealing technologies, reverse engineering, and so on and so on. Russia is trying. The Soviet Union was trying to do this for decades. Russia was trying to do this since 1992. But the problem is that Russia does not have enough number of engineers, of qualified engineers. And during my research, I saw the reports of some factories in Russia. It's just their local report that we were trying to re-engineer something which were previously purchased in Europe or in the United States. We were trying to do this. We even understand how it works. We don't know how to reproduce this domestically. That's why Russian import substitution policy, Russian re-engineering policy means purchase more China-made consumer-grade electronics, machine tools, and so on. They purchase this. They try to combine this domestically to do something that will work at least for a while. And the quality of the products is not good. And there is no material base for a proper import substitution, for a proper re-engineering.
Thank you so much, Pavel. Thank you to our audience for sending in so many excellent questions, and I'm trying to combine them, get to as many of them as I can. But there's a really important one here, and I want to start with Stefan. What would be the possible risks for Europe and former Soviet countries in case the US agrees to giving part of Ukraine to Russia, even with Russia not accomplishing any of its goals so far? Stefan, you've worked for so many years in the Black Sea region, in the former Soviet countries. You understand the region inside and out, and I'm sure you're seeing just how damaging this narrative is of the US negotiating with Russia while excluding Ukraine from the negotiations, or even the possibility of the United States giving away Ukrainian territories or other concessions to Russia. But I think it is important to talk about it. What would be the risks? What would be the results of something like that? And then I want Bob and Pavel to comment on this as well.
I think for many post-Soviet countries, but also for actors in the different countries, I think the US was a kind of a reference point, and also creating a kind of a normative in a way, together with Europe. But I think the US was in the end the actor who was able to act, also to punish or to sanction to some extent authoritarianism. And I think with this Trump government, which supports authoritarianism or is by itself also has elements of authoritarianism, I think this reference point, this framework is disappearing. And I think it invites authoritarian leaders or governments, and we see it in Georgia. I think the Georgian Dream, for instance, is moving also forward because it understands that it will be not punished by the US. and just can do what it wants to do. And the Europeans are anyway not really acting, yeah, or not united in this. And I think that will impact on all post-Soviet countries. I think we will see hedging strategies also. We will see that they want to be more safe also towards Russia and China. They want to create other options. So I think it will undermine also democratic developments in these countries. I think USID was a key funder for civil society, for independent media, for many other things. Also in Ukraine, I think the USID was the main funder on supporting EU integration in the legal sector, in vetting of judges, yeah, and so on. So it's much more substantial than we maybe would expect. So, and I think if that would be really a clear message to Russia, to other authoritarian countries, and also to post-Soviet countries who wants to leave Russia's sphere of influence. So if Trump hands over, let's say it like this, parts of Ukraine to Putin, I think they will understand that no one will protect us. No one will support us. Yeah, I'm looking also to Armenia, for instance, at the moment. Questions then with Moldova, but also Central Asian countries who really wanted to leave also this Chinese or at least to balance this Russian and Chinese sphere of influence. I think that's the clear message. We have to deal with these guys because they are either not better or they will anyway not support us. So I think it has a regional and a global impact. And I don't see that the Europeans are really capable and willing in any way to step in. And it's also maybe just one final sentence on this, on Europe. So if JD Vance and Elon Musk support right-wing or extremist parties in Europe, so interfering in domestic politics, undermining also our democratic system and cohesion, empowering also those who polarizing the systems. So it means that they hitting our value and function, the way of functioning of our systems inside, and it's maybe even more dangerous than Mr. Putin, yeah, and his way how he tries to undermine cohesion and fools polarization in our societies.
Thank you, Bob.
Maya, I've lost the thread of the original question. Can you?
What would be the risks, the consequences of Trump giving away parts of it?
Yeah, okay,
risks
yeah.
to our European allies, but also the post-Soviet countries in general?
Well, of course, other than the fact that it's a violation of that Russia's invasion violates the UN Charter and multiple pieces and types of international law, it sets a horrible precedent. I think the idea, I think if you were to try to sort of peel it back to what maybe people in the Trump administration have and try to put an imprimatur of strategy on it. I'm not sure there is a strategy, but let's assume there is. The strategy might be stop the war because it's bloody and it's destabilizing for Europe. And also it's costing everybody money, the US as well. It's costing lives. And anyway, we need to shift to the Indo-Pacific region, or the Asia-Pacific region. And I keep hearing this, it's a fantasy. I keep hearing, and maybe we can get Russia on our side for the coming confrontation with China. That's an absolute fantasy. There's absolutely zero chance of that happening. So if you were to give it the imprimatur of sort of strategic thinking, that I guess that would be it. But the cost of doing something like that, not only the cost of Ukraine, the cost of European security, the cost of US national security would be grave. I mean, I go back to what Dara Massakat has said. Every time Putin believes he thinks he's fighting the West, let's be clear, he's fighting in Ukraine, but he's fighting against us. He declared war essentially on the West in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference. And he has continued to prosecute this war in asymmetrical ways, because in ways that give Russia an advantage, in places where Russia has an advantage. So if we are to sort of agree to Russia's demands in Ukraine, first of all, it won't stop the war in Ukraine, and it will invite a larger war. Like, I'll put it this way, as bluntly as I can put it. We'll end up fighting Russia somewhere in the future in a war that we can't opt out of, like we're opting out of Ukraine. I can't be more clear than that. If we give, not ours to give, first of all, but if we give Russia 19.6% of Ukraine, or maybe 25%, because again, Putin's demands are all 5 of these provinces, we will fight Russia somewhere else at a time and place of Russia's choosing in a way that we cannot opt out of.
Thank you, Bob. Pavel, I want to ask my last question, and it's a big one, but I hope as as someone from Russia, you might have a perspective on this. What do you think would stop Putin? It's not just Ukraine, it's not just Georgia, it's not just Moldova, right? The hunger for war has been there ever since he's been around. What do you think would stop him and his regime so that we don't have to worry about a Russian threat in that region again?
I try to study the Russian regime not as a Putin's personalistic regime, because according to my opinion, the current regime was born before Vladimir Putin relocated from St. Petersburg to Moscow. And this regime may survive after Vladimir Putin will die or will disappear one day. I think Russia will be stopped or will stop only when there will be a domestic political economy changes. And these changes must be fundamental. These changes must be more fundamental than was in perestroika times in late 1980s. And when and if these changes will come, then we will expect Russia will change its behavior. Until these changes will come, Russia must be an object of deterrence, active deterrence, not, pacifying the aggressor or something like that, but active deterrence, like Ukrainian armed forces demonstrate us during these 3 years, like European allies of NATO, especially on the eastern flank, demonstrate us during all these years, like Germany demonstrate us this, because Germany maybe did not invest more in its defense in previous 30 years, but Germany supports Ukraine significantly, and the United States supports Ukraine significantly, and that is a power of coalition. Any single member of coalition, it may will or it may not to support someone, or it may have or it may not have enough capabilities to prevent something. But only together in the coalition of forces, the West may win. The West together with Ukraine. And after the victory, they may give Russia a hope for, economic, cultural restoration. Because I'm afraid Russia cannot change itself domestically, only, without any foreign pressure, any foreign influence.
Thank you so much. I think that's such a great note to end on. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I would like to thank our audience for so much active participation, and thank you for your time. A recording of this event will be available on our YouTube channel, and the conversation continues on our website at fpri.org. Stefan Meister, Robert Hamilton, Pavel Luzhin. Thank you so much for joining me today.